There was a time when Conor McGregor could do no wrong. The brash, charismatic Irishman who talked his way into million-dollar fights and backed it up with left-hand knockouts. He didn't just win, he rewrote the rulebook for combat sports promotion. But today, behind the billion-dollar whiskey deals and flashy cars lies a far darker reality. Multiple arrests, shattered bones, legal battles, businesses in decline, a body pushed past its limits, and now complete silence as rumors swirl of retirement, health issues, and a fall from grace that few could have predicted. In this video, we break down the tragic lifestyle Conor McGregor now lives at 37, and why his empire may already be crumbling from within. Before the yachts, the suits, and the whiskey empire, there was just a hungry, unknown fighter from Crumlin, Dublin. Conor McGregor's origin story is one of sheer willpower and defiance against the odds. Growing up in a working-class Irish neighborhood where opportunity was scarce and fights were plenty, McGregor didn't just want to succeed, he needed it. He trained in boxing from a young age and later added kickboxing and MMA into the mix, honing a style built on speed, precision, and devastating timing. But it wasn't just his fighting ability that made him stand out, it was his voice, boastful, confident, and magnetic. He called his shot before the world even cared to listen. At 18, while working as a plumber's apprentice, McGregor realized his life was heading in a direction he couldn't accept. He quit betting everything on the fight game. His girlfriend, Dee Devlin, stood by him as he endured unemployment, financial hardship, and brutal training sessions that most would break under. They lived on welfare checks as low as €188 a week, barely making ends meet. But Conor kept the dream alive. Then in 2013, everything changed. McGregor exploded onto the UFC scene with a stunning knockout of Marcus Brimage, delivering not only a highlight reel finish, but a mic performance that announced a new era in MMA. The crowd couldn't get enough. Conor's mouth sold fights, but his left hand cashed the checks. His legendary run through the featherweight division, culminating in a 13-second knockout of Jose Aldo in 2015, solidified him as the face of the UFC. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a myth in motion. The press conferences were events. His walkouts felt like coronations when he declared, "We're not here to take part, we're here to take over." It wasn't just bravado, it was prophecy. By 2016, Conor had become the first UFC fighter to hold 2 titles simultaneously, and he did it all with an Irish flag draped over his shoulders, a devilish grin on his face, and the world eating out of his hand. But beneath the surface of this meteoric rise, the seeds of something darker had already started to grow. Because when you build your entire identity on being untouchable, the fall becomes much harder when it finally comes. The defining turning point in Conor McGregor's life wasn't a fight, it was a payday. In August 2017, he stepped into a boxing ring against Floyd Mayweather in what was billed as the biggest crossover event in combat sports history. He had no real shot at winning, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the spectacle and the paycheck. McGregor earned over $100 million from that fight. It was a level of wealth he had never imagined, and it changed everything. He went from being the most hungry fighter on the roster to the wealthiest athlete on the planet, almost overnight. After the Mayweather fight, something shifted. McGregor wasn't fighting for legacy anymore, he was fighting for lifestyle. He bought luxury watches worth more than a house. He traveled the world in private jets, partied on yachts, and posted Instagram photos wearing $10,000 suits tailored in gold thread. His hunger gave way to indulgence. The Notorious persona that once served him so well in the cage became his entire reality outside of it. Every week brought a new headline about some lavish purchase or nightclub appearance. Meanwhile, the fire that had driven him to the top began to flicker. When he returned to the UFC in 2018 to face Khabib Nurmagomedov, fans could already see the difference. He didn't look like the same Conor. He talked a bigger game than ever, but the performance fell flat. He was dominated and humiliated, both physically and emotionally. After the loss, he spiraled even further. Fights became rare, controversies became common, and it was clear that the Mayweather fight fight had become both his greatest victory and his greatest curse. That one night in Las Vegas made Conor McGregor rich beyond belief, but it also robbed him of the very thing that made him who he was: desperation. As the money poured in and the fame reached dizzying heights, a darker side of McGregor began to surface, one that couldn't be hidden behind the tailored suits or flashy cars. The arrest records started to pile up. In April 2018, just months after the Khabib loss, Conor threw a dolly through a bus window at UFC 223's Media Day, injuring multiple fighters. It wasn't a staged stunt. It was reckless, dangerous, and the first sign that McGregor's personal demons were starting to bubble over. He was arrested, charged, and although he avoided jail time, the incident shook the MMA world. It didn't stop there. In 2019, he smashed a fan's phone outside a nightclub in Miami. That same year, footage emerged of him punching an elderly man in an Irish pub for refusing to drink his whiskey. Each incident chipped away at the aura he had built. No longer was he the charming rogue. He was becoming a cautionary tale. Allegations of sexual misconduct surfaced in Ireland, casting a shadow over his public image. Though no charges were filed in most cases, the media frenzy never let up, and Conor's reputation continued to deteriorate. His relationship with the UFC became strained. Dana White, once his biggest supporter, began keeping his distance. The organization stopped building every card around him. Even fans who had once defended his antics began to question whether the man who once inspired millions had become a liability. The endless cycle of legal trouble, public apologies, and tone-deaf social media posts revealed the truth. Conor McGregor was losing control, not just of his image, but of his identity. He was no longer the hungry underdog. He was the millionaire who forgot where he came from, and the consequences were just beginning. By the time Conor McGregor returned to face Donald Cerrone in 2020, something was already off. Yes, he scored a spectacular 40-second knockout that night, but those close to the sport knew better. That win felt like a spark in an otherwise dying fire, a carefully selected comeback fight against an aging opponent who posed little threat. For McGregor, it was an opportunity to remind fans of the old magic. But the truth is, behind the scenes, the years of wear and tear were catching up fast. His body was breaking down. By 2021, that reality hit like a freight train. McGregor faced Dustin Poirier in back-to-back bouts that would go on to define the tragic next chapter of his career. In their second meeting, Poirier battered McGregor with relentless leg kicks and sharp counters, forcing a stoppage via TKO. But it was the trilogy fight, just months later, that marked a violent turning point. In the closing seconds of the first round, McGregor stepped back and snapped his tibia clean in half. Just like that, the Irish warrior who once danced around the cage with sniper-like precision lay on the floor in agony, screaming in pain as medics rushed in. The footage was haunting. A broken leg, a broken man. McGregor hadn't just lost a fight, he had lost a piece of himself. The road to recovery was long, and the man who once promised precision beats power, timing beats speed, was now fighting battles he never expected. Not against opponents in the cage, but against time, irrelevance, and his own body. For a man whose identity was tied so deeply to movement, power, and confidence, the injury was more than physical, it was existential. It showed the world, and perhaps showed Conor himself, that the invincibility was over. And while he promised the comeback of all comebacks, deep down, fans could sense the desperation. The smile was still there, the bravado still echoed, but the spark, the magic that once made him undeniable, was flickering. In the brutal world of combat sports, time waits for no one. And for McGregor, that time was catching up fast. As his fighting career stalled, Conor McGregor doubled down on the one thing he still had complete control over: the lifestyle. The yachts got bigger, the parties got wilder, the Rolex collection expanded. His Instagram turned into a non-stop highlight reel of designer suits, gold watches, Cuban cigars, and rare whiskey bottles. In 2021, he was officially named the highest-paid athlete in the world by Forbes, earning $180 million in a single year, most of it from business ventures like proper number 12 Irish whiskey. But beneath all the shine was a dangerous truth. Conor had built a lifestyle so enormous, so excessive that he couldn't turn back, even if he wanted to. He wasn't living the life of a fighter anymore. He was living the life of a king. Private jets, lavish getaways, custom Lamborghinis, and six-figure shopping sprees became normal. For many, it looked like success. But for fighters, luxury is poison. It numbs the drive, softens the edge, and replaces hunger with comfort. The man who once fought to feed his family was now drowning in everything he ever wanted, and that was the tragedy. His wealth became a prison of expectations. How do you return to the grind when you've tasted the world? Even his own team seemed caught in the whirlwind. Critics noted that his training camps became inconsistent. His focus wandered. He was distracted by lawsuits, photo shoots, and promotional events. In interviews, he spoke of legacy, but his actions pointed to indulgence. Fans saw it, fighters saw it, and perhaps most importantly, his opponents saw it too. No longer were they facing an unstoppable force. They were facing a businessman playing fighter, a man trying to balance boardrooms and training sessions and failing at both. The lifestyle that once symbolized McGregor's victory over poverty was now symbolizing his fall from greatness. He had become a celebrity first, a fighter second, and for a sport as ruthless as MMA, that's a fatal shift. As Conor McGregor entered his mid-30s, the weight of fame became more than just figurative. Everywhere he went, cameras followed. Every tweet was dissected. Every public appearance sparked headlines. And increasingly, those headlines painted a picture not of a hero, but of a man cracking under pressure. He was no longer the charismatic rogue of 2015. Now, he was the tabloid villain, accused, investigated, mocked, and doubted. Multiple allegations of sexual misconduct surfaced, dragging his name through legal firestorms in Ireland and abroad. Even when charges weren't filed, the headlines were devastating. Add in reports of bar brawls, nightclub altercations, and a revolving door of lawsuits from fans, former training partners, and even business associates, and the narrative became undeniable. McGregor wasn't just falling, he was unraveling. In 2023, he faced renewed controversy after an incident at an NBA game led to yet another public accusation of assault. The details were murky, but the optics were undeniable. Once again, Conor McGregor was in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons, and every time, it chipped away at what was left of his legacy. The fans who once chanted his name now debated whether he should even be allowed to fight again. Sponsors distanced themselves. Dana White, who had once said, "When Conor wins, the UFC wins," now appeared hesitant to book him. And through it all, McGregor seemed more and more isolated. The smile turned forced. The press conferences lacked the old electricity. His social media posts felt like a man trying to remind the world, and maybe himself, that he still mattered. Fame had once been his weapon. Now it was his curse. Because when you've lived as a god in the eyes of millions, becoming mortal again isn't just humbling, it's suffocating. And for Conor McGregor, the biggest opponent left wasn't Khabib or Dustin or even time. It was himself. Behind the headlines, behind the lights and luxury, there's something that hits even harder than a punch. It's the slow unraveling of what once kept you grounded. For Conor McGregor, that was his family. Long before the yachts and mansions, before the Vegas suites and whiskey deals, there was Dee Devlin, the woman who stood beside him when he had nothing but dreams and drive. They built a life together in the shadows, raising children as McGregor built his empire. But in recent years, cracks have started to show. The pressures of fame, the endless touring, the court appearances, the public scandals, they didn't just affect McGregor's image, they shook the foundation of his personal life. Whispers about Dee growing distant began circulating in MMA forums and tabloids alike. Fans noticed her absence from major events. Once always at his side, now she was often nowhere to be seen. Some speculated she was stepping back to protect their children from the chaos. Others believed the weight of Conor's public controversies had finally grown too heavy for the relationship to bear. In a 2022 interview, McGregor tried to reassure the public, saying "Dee's my rock. We're solid," but the tone lacked conviction. His eyes told a different story, a man trying to keep the world from seeing the fractures behind the curtain. Raising children in the spotlight is difficult enough. Doing so while headlines link your partner to violent incidents and repeated allegations of misconduct? Nearly impossible. Those who once viewed McGregor as a family man now questioned his ability to shield his loved ones from his storm. And in that space of uncertainty, something tragic began to bloom. The story of the rags-to-riches fighter was being replaced by the tale of a father drifting away from what mattered most. His Instagram remained full of smiles, fancy dinners, and luxury vacations. But the photos felt curated, staged. The authenticity, the raw love that once defined Conor and Dee, seemed dulled by the weight of years spent in damage control. And that's the real tragedy, not the loss of belts or pay-per-view clout, but the quiet, painful erosion of the only thing that ever really kept him human. For nearly 3 years, McGregor promised it, over and over again. The greatest comeback in history. He teased new opponents, new training camps, new intensity. There were posts showing shredded abs, videos of him running hills, sparring young lions, and yelling, "We're back, baby!" But the fights never came. Or if they did, they were delayed, canceled, or buried in excuses. Slowly, fans started to catch on. The comeback was never real. It was an illusion, a performance for the camera. The tragedy was, Conor seemed to be the only one who still believed it. He entered the USADA testing pool late, triggering speculations that he wasn't physically or mentally ready to return. UFC insiders whispered that he was dragging his feet, trying to angle for favorable terms. And when he was finally slated to return against Michael Chandler, fans held their breath, only for the fight to vanish from the schedule without a trace. Rumors swirled about medical clearance issues. Others said the UFC simply no longer trusted McGregor to show up. Worse still, McGregor's own words began to betray him. In a podcast clip that went viral in 2024, he rambled incoherently about his next move, contradicting himself multiple times. "I'm training. I'm always training," he said, before admitting he hadn't sparred in months. His once laser-sharp persona had given way to confusion. He wasn't the assassin preparing for war. He was a man lost in the fog of nostalgia. And then came the backlash. Former champions like Daniel Cormier and Michael Bisping began calling him out, not as opponents, but as a cautionary tale. "He's not the same guy," Cormier said bluntly. "The hunger's gone. He's chasing ghosts." The narrative shifted from, "Can he come back?" to, "Should he even try?" That silence in the octagon spoke volumes. For a fighter like McGregor, inactivity was worse than defeat. It meant he was no longer relevant. And perhaps the saddest part of all was this. Deep down, Conor still believed he was one win away from saving everything. But the world had already moved on. There was a time when Conor McGregor's name stood for greatness. He was the first UFC fighter to hold 2 titles in different weight classes at the same time. He sold out Madison Square Garden, electrified arenas, and transcended the sport in ways no one else had. It's no longer about titles. It's about legacy. And right now, that legacy sits in limbo. For every highlight reel knockout, there's now a mugshot. For every sold-out fight, there's a lawsuit or scandal. The story of Conor McGregor has become a cautionary tale of what happens when the fame outgrows the fighter. His Hall of Fame credentials are undeniable, but his name carries an asterisk. Not for steroids or cheating, but for the tragic spiral that followed his peak. Dana White rarely talks about him now, unless pressed. The UFC machine has moved on to fresher stars. Fighters like Sean O'Malley, Ilia Topuria, and Islam Makhachev. The young lions see McGregor not as a threat, but as a payday, a fading name to put on their resume. And that hurts, because for years, Conor was the sun around which the MMA world revolved. The Notorious era is over. The suits don't fit the same. The walkouts don't carry the same electricity. The chants are quieter. His last fight, whenever it comes, if it ever comes, will not be about redemption. It will be about closure. A farewell to a fighter who once made us believe in the impossible, even as he now struggles to believe in himself. So, where does the story go from here? Can McGregor find peace in retirement? Can he rebuild a legacy that's been cracked by ego and excess? Or will he continue to drift, haunted by what could have been, surrounded by wealth, but empty where it counts? Because in the end, tragedy isn't always about losing everything. Sometimes it's about having everything and still feeling like something's missing.